Please join me in welcoming Sonia Johnson.
Thank you very much. You know what this is, don't you? This is vagina power. It's amazing how many people know that. You just see that everywhere you go. I'm going to begin by telling you a dream that a woman told me. She was a woman from Missouri. She told me she dreamed one night that she was standing on top of a tall building, looking out in every direction. As far as she could see, all she could see were more concrete, glass, steel buildings. And she felt very alienated by that because she was a country woman. She wanted to go home. She was homesick. And a voice inside her said, well, that's easy. If you want to go home, all you've got to do is go and step off the edge of this building. So she walked over the edge of the building and she looked down, and way down there was a little miniature street with little miniature cars, and she said, hey, this is ridiculous. You know, if I step off here, I'll kill myself. And the voice inside her said, well, take it or leave it. It's the only way to get home. And as she thought that over, the thought of never seeing the fields and the grass and the trees of home again, the grief of that so outweighed her fear of death that she walked over to the edge of the building and she stepped off. And as she started to fall, a big rope appeared in front of her. This is a dream, remember? And she grabbed a hold of the rope and she swung way out to the end of its arc. And when she got way out there, she realized if you want to go home, all you've got to do is go and step off the edge of this building. That building where she'd just been, and she wouldn't be any closer home. Little miniature street with those little miniature cars. She let go again. As she started to fall, another big rope appeared in front of her. She grabbed hold of that, swung out the end of its arc, let go again, grabbed a hold again, let go again, all the way home. When she woke up, she said she knew immediately what that dream meant. She said she knew that it was her wise old woman inside telling her how women are leading the species home. That was a hard thing for her to take in, to believe, to have any feeling for. And it's hard for all women to believe that it's possible that that's what we're about, that it's possible that we are central to anything. Well, and the reason, of course, is easy. We've been slaves. We have been the slaves on this planet, in every group, every country, every tribe, every nation, every class for the last 5,000 years. And slaves, part of being a slave is feeling as if nothing you're doing is essential or important or could possibly mean anything, certainly couldn't mean anything about the evolution of a species, for heaven's sake. Forget that. And also, that feeling of worthlessness and peripheralness is emphasized and reinforced all day long by the trumpets of patriarchy that are blaring in our ears and telling us that the women's movement is about issues, women's issues. You know, you have to squint your mouth up into a little tiny zoom to say women's issues. And then it's about women's rights and women's issues, and you know, that wasn't exactly how we felt. But we believed those voices for so long that our feeling of the immenseness of this, as we listen to them, kind of collapses down to, and we say, oh yes, we've got to get busy on these issues of ours, haven't we? And it's only when we get together like this, or we're with our friends, or alone someplace and have some clarity, that we remember what the women's movement really is all about. And we realize that it has nothing whatever to do with issues, that it isn't about women's rights, that the women's movement is the greatest spiritual revolution in the history of the world. There's never been anything, and you know when I say spiritual, I don't mean religious. You know, I just wanted to make sure you knew that. I don't think religion and spirituality can exist in the same place at the same time. Nothing remotely like this awakening, nothing remotely like the women's movement has ever been on this planet before, as far as we know, ever in human history. Half the human race is rising, half the human race, rising out of the deepest coma, such a slumber, of an anesthetization, a hypnotic spell, rising finally after thousands and thousands of years. Finally, thank goodness, to save our own lives, we're rising everywhere. to save our own lives, and in saving our lives, to save all life on the planet. We know that feminism that undergirds this great global transformation of the human species. We know that feminism hasn't anything to do with issues, that feminism is a way of being in the world. It's a way of seeing everything. It's a worldview. In fact, it is a philosophy of such genius, such incredible brilliance, that if some man had thought of it, we would all be slavering all over his boot tips. He would be on the front of everything, you know, and on every talk show, and everybody would just be saying, oh, this man is such a titan, oh, such a brilliant mind. Compared to him, Marx was nobody. But of course, because it's coming out of women's lives. Because what feminism is an articulation of the way women are in the world. It's an articulation of the way we view the world. It's an articulation of our value system. We have the only alternative value system to patriarchy. We are the alternative. And it's coming out of each one of our lives. There isn't a female Marx on the planet right now, or equivalent thereof, out of whom is coming this theory. It's coming out of our daily lives as we begin to wake up, as we begin to take our place in history, start to fulfill our destiny. Because our destiny is, all women on this planet now, our destiny is to do this work, is to move this species and all life into some place that we have only dreamed of, longed for, that we can't even imagine, but we know that it's some place where finally there can be some love, that there hasn't been any love on this planet for 5,000 years, and we are all so hungry for it, and that's where it's moving. And we know that this is what feminism is about, and that it couldn't have a female Marx, it couldn't just have a leader or several big leaders, because then we wouldn't be moving into a new world. That the new world is that it is coming out of all our lives. That it's incredibly important for every woman who has any consciousness at all to begin to transform her own life, and that that's what it's all about. Well, as I think about transforming my own life and what that means about transforming the planet, and as I've thought about this for several years, because, you know, the only thing that's important to me, what I'm focused on like a laser beam, is trying to change reality. And if that's the case, and it is with me, what I have realized I had to do is figure out what reality is. What is it? And where does it come from? And who made it? And how mutable is it? In other words, the nature of reality. A simple question like that. We realize that none of those guys although they've tussled with this for a long time, it was left to women to finally get a grip on it. So we've been trying to get a grip on this. And as I've thought it over, because if we're going to change reality, we really have to know what it is, and I've been thinking, what is it? And I remembered how those people that have been tussling with it have been saying, well, you know, there isn't such a thing as objective reality out there, and I couldn't make any sense of that until across my desk came this book in which there was this story about Magellan and his men and how they sailed into the Tierra del Fuego Islands a few hundred years ago in their big sailing ships. You know what they look like, big massive sails, glistening in the sun, billowing in the wind. Ta-dum! They came into the harbor, and they put down their anchor, and the men all crawled down over the sides of these ships into little rowboats and rowed up to the shore. Well, sometime later, the shaman called all the islanders together, and she said, and that's the only place I changed the story, because I figured they changed it first, and I'm just changing it back again. So the shaman called the people together, and she said, I'm going to tell you something preposterous, so get ready. She said, I've been thinking about how those men couldn't have come across all that water, all that open sea, in those little bitty boats that they rowed up to our shore in. And that means, and this is the preposterous part, that means that there have to be big, big boats out there in our harbor. Boy, everybody turned and looked out there and got goosebumps, because all they could see was the blue, shimmering water. And they turned back to her and said, really? And she said, yeah, really. Now we can say, how is it that they couldn't see those ships? Those ships were really there. They were real. They had to have been able to see those ships, but they didn't. And because they weren't real to them, because reality is what we expect to see in that harbor. Reality is what we think is going to be there when we look. Reality is what we think is inevitable. Reality is what we think God put down out there, and now we just got to cope with it the best we can. Reality is what we think is very strong and very powerful and very important. Reality is what we value. Reality is what we pay attention to all the time. And if that's true, that means that all reality is in here, that this is where it lives. And if that's true, it means that all systems are internal systems. And that means patriarchy lives in here, that this is where it lives. And that every morning we have to keep it real, to make it so that we can keep seeing it out there in the harbor. Every morning when we wake up, we have to project it again out onto our external canvas, because that's what we do with what we think is real. We project it out there. We have to project patriarchy, all these institutions, all these yucky ways out there every morning when we wake up, and then we have to start we have to every morning begin interacting with them again as if they were real. We have to keep it going with our participation in believing in it, in participating to make it real, to institutionalize it, to make it what we call objective all the time. And if that's true, it means that the minute patriarchy ceases to exist in here, the minute we stop projecting our belief in it, our belief that it's very strong, the men are very powerful, we've got to deal with this, and because this is the way things are, the minute we stop doing that and stop interacting with it in a way to make it real out there, the minute patriarchy stops existing in here, it will stop existing everywhere. I went to something called, what that means is, of course, that the only genuine revolution possible, the only revolution that really is a revolution, that really changes anything, is an internal revolution. That this is where the most radical action in the world can take place. And that when people say, oh, you've dropped out now, haven't you, Sonia? I said, no, finally I've dropped in. Now I am doing the really radical action of my life. Well, I was at something called the Wise Women's Council a few years ago in Houston in the summer. And all the famous feminists were there. And I thought, what a wonderful opportunity. Here are the women whose books I'd read when I first came into the movement. Here were the women who'd since become friends and whose minds I really admired and respected. And we had a lot of free time after our official meetings, just kind of lying around trying to keep cool in Houston summer and talking. And so I thought, and I was writing this book that I've got over here, and I was thinking about all these ideas, and they were so not clear, to say the least. And so I thought, I'll just try them out, because one of the ways I get things clear is to say them. You know, you do this too, I trust. And so I thought, here's a perfect audience. So I started telling these women how I was going to begin to detach my belief from patriarchy. I was going to stop projecting it out there every morning. I was going to stop coming to the war every morning, ready again, you know. Because you know that phrase, that slogan, it says, what if they threw a war and nobody came? I was going to stop coming. And I told them about something a good friend of mine had said, who just happens to be in the audience tonight. Isn't that wonderful? I give this speech everywhere. And tonight, Sheila Feiger is in the audience. And she'd said to me sometime before, you know, Sonia, I've done all the things she said, I've been a member of now for 14 years. And I've been president of New York State now for a couple of terms. I've done all the things they told me were going to change the system. I've voted and I've organized voters, and I've lobbied and organized lobbyists, and I've campaigned and organized campaigns, and I've walked districts and precincts and gone door to door, and I've done media, and I've marched and demonstrated and done civil disobedience. And I'm not going to do any of that anymore, because it's not going to change anything. And I said to those wise women there, I'm not going to do any more of that either. And one of them said, oh, Sonia. You know, they're always saying to me, oh, Sonia. That's just not practical, she said. And I thought, practical? Isn't that an interesting word, practical? I thought about how for 5,000 years women have been resisting patriarchy in every way that we could think of doing it. And you know, if we want to know what women were like all those thousands of years back there, all we got to do is look in the mirror or right at the woman next to us. This is how women always have been. This is how women always were, like us. Always brilliant, always strong, always magnificent, always courageous, and always knew on some level, if not consciously, always, all women have known that the men's system is inimical to everything we love, is deadly to life. We have tried in every way we knew to get them to stop doing this, in all the covert, overt, political, private, public ways that there are, and we have been very creative and ingenious people always, so we found hundreds and hundreds of ways to resist this system, to try to change those guys, to get them to understand, to get them to stop it. 5,000 years of resistance. You know, I don't want to be hasty, but it seems to me... But it seems to me that 5,000 years is long enough to try something that doesn't work. And women want to be fair, and I think we've given it a fair trial. Don't you? And so I said to these women, I thought that I was beginning to figure out that what we resist persists. That in fact, men didn't just get worse and worse and worse all by themselves, but that somehow women were involved in that in some way. And I said, for instance, look out. I mean, I look out at this system, and this system is everywhere. The schools, the churches, the grocery stores, the buildings, the streets, the cars. I look out there and see nothing that I would have done this way. Not one single thing. Nothing. Nothing. I don't see anything I would have done this way at all. I can't see one place where I am reflected. None of this reflects me. None of this reflects what I love. None of it reflects what I value. None of it reflects what I am, how I am in the world. It is so alien. It might have dropped off of some other planet, or I might have. It's not my stuff at all. And what I see also is patriarchy when I look out there, I see patriarchy in its decadence. It is now so ripe that it's almost, it's just rotten. It is so now fully itself. It is completely, putrescently patriarchal. How did it get this way? How did it get to its very nadir, or the pinnacle of its putridness, or whatever, when we were working so hard to try to change it? And some women say, well, boy, think what happened, where it would be if we hadn't. And I'm saying, I got a hunch it couldn't be a lot worse. I think this is as bad as it can get without killing all of us at once. That's the next step. That's the only way it can get more deadly than it is to kill us all right away, rather than slowly and so on, painfully. And so I said to myself, it looks to me like that's some evidence that our resistance has been collaborative. And if that's true, why is it that what we resist seems to persist? Why is it that resistance is the most powerful, though subtle form of collaboration possible? And the minute I asked myself that question, into my mind popped this image. I think in pictures, and came this picture of a great fortress on a hill, with its pennants flying, its big thick walls, its massive gate, patriarchy, and all the guys behind those big walls and that gate, all lined up there doing patriarchy, mischief of some kind. And down the hill, looking up at all that strength up there, all us women standing there, looking up there and saying to one another, boy, how are we going to get them to stop this? We've got to get through to those guys. How are we going to get them to listen to us? How are we going to pay attention? We've got to get through to them. And some women are pole vaulting over the walls. They think if they can just get in there, they can change it. And the rest of us down there with this great battering ram, and think of the shape of a battering ram. There we are. with this great battering ram, and we're just all lined up along it. And we are, I mean, hundreds of us, all down through history, the hundreds of years we have been doing this. Here we are with this battering ram, and we're backing up, and we're running up at that door and going, whoom, like that, and over again, and at the walls, whoom, and we get worn out, and we fall by the way, and others, the next generation rushes up, grabs a battering ram, and they do another section of the wall, boom, like that, and over and over and over again, we batter at the walls of patriarchy, batter trying to get through at those guys. Now, I could see, as I looked at that picture in mind, exactly what was happening behind those walls. Can't you just see it? There are those guys. Oh, wow, is there adrenaline running? We are spurring them on to such enormous creativity and inventiveness to defend their system. And not only that, every time we whomp against one of those walls, they look to see if there's a weak place there. And so they are strengthening that little weak place in their system and in their theory and in their philosophy. We're helping them strengthen it. And they are back there inventing bionic metals. That door is so thick now, nothing can get through it. We just entrench them more. We just solidify their system. We just, in fact, have helped them get it very much together by bombarding them like that, by making them have to defend it all the time, and by showing them where the weaknesses are, by hitting against them. You know, I should have figured this out as a mother. I mean, does this sound familiar to anybody in this room? You know full well. I mean, we could have learned this in our own little patriarchal microcosms, couldn't we? If we had taken ourselves seriously as mothers, we all know that if you want to get your children, if you've got a child that's doing something you can't stand, that the absolutely the worst possible thing you can do is hit against that thing, nag them, talk about, make it a big issue, because what happens if you do? We can all say it in unison, right? It just gets worse, right? I'm speaking as a mother of 4 teenagers. I mean, some of them are no longer teenagers, thank goodness. Having gone through that, and I don't know why I didn't figure out that principle at the time. But, you know, better late than never. Well, so those women said to me, those wise women, they're lying on the floor, fanning themselves, said, "All right, Sonia, what does that mean for you?" I was afraid they'd ask. I said, well, I'll tell you what it means right now. I don't know everything it means, and I don't know if I'm going to know everything it means in my lifetime. I'm working on it. But right now it means I'm not going to work to get any more laws passed in this country. Nothing could make me do any more of that. Oh, you know, that was horrifying to them, because they'd spent most of their lives, or at least most of their last 20 years of their lives in the women's movement, working on getting laws passed here, the ERA passed, all those things. There was a time I would have given my life to get the ERA passed, and now you couldn't get me to raise a finger. And it was terrible for me to say that to them. And they said, well, why not? And I said, because I finally figured out something. I finally figured out that the men own the law. I know you're amazed, aren't you, that it... It is amazing. I said, they own it. You see, they make them. They make those laws. They interpret the laws, and they enforce them. And they always do it to keep patriarchy going. I mean, it is set up. There are checks, and when they talk about checks and balances, they're not kidding. It is set up so that no matter what we do, it always keeps this. We know this is patriarchy, the power over sadomasochistic model on planet Earth, the war model, the win-lose, one-up, the model of oppression. Men on the top, women on the bottom, in every class, every race, every nation of the world, women kept there by incalculable violence and political terrorism. That there isn't any other way to keep adult, strong, brilliant, beautiful human beings on their faces in the dust, in the mud, except by such violence that it is unspeakable. And we know that that's the pattern, that's the model on planet Earth. And then I said to those women, everything, and that the law is a pillar of that. The law was set up to keep that. Religion is set up to keep that. This university is set up to keep that. The schools, you know, you name it, it's set up to make sure this goes on and on and on. And I said, then the laws, no matter what we do, always come back to keeping this going. And I said, let me give you some examples. I mentioned to them about California women who have told me about the struggle that they went through, that you went through, to get no-fault divorce, and how you would do anything to get rid of that, because guess what? Because the men owned that law. They passed it, now they own it, and what they do now is use it against the women. And I said, all over the country, where women have spent hours, I mean, hundreds of hours, lobbying men to pass child support laws so that they could get some financial help from the erstwhiles out there to take care of this brood. And almost every place I've been where women have got those laws passed, what's happening now? Guess what? Are men paying any more child support than they ever did? No. Guess who's paying child support? Us, the women. That's what's happening out there because the men own it. They can use it the way they want it, and they always want to make sure that they don't allow us to rise, that they don't allow us to use their system to get ahead. And I said the same thing happens with, the same thing has happened with custody laws. Women got custody laws passed so we could try to get custody of our children, and now men are using them to get custody of the children. I said, I'm not going to hand the men a knife to stab me in the back anymore. I'm not going to be accomplice in my own oppression one more second. And that was unbearable to these women, and they were thinking, I could see their minds, some of them just turning out. They've got to find a hole in this. And I said, I hope you do. Because it's that, you know, what I want more than anything is just to figure out how to change the world tomorrow. That's all. And if you've got a better idea, boy, I want it right now. And so one of them said, I think I got it, Sonia. I can see the faults in your thinking, and they're demonstrated by the example of when we were able to go through the men's system to get free. And I said, when was that? And she said, well, it's Roe versus Wade. And I said, oh, shoot. I was hoping you were going to tell me something that didn't prove my point, but let me tell you what I think about Roe versus Wade. And then I told her about how she remembered at the beginning of this the second half of the women's movement in this century, oh, there was such excitement. I wasn't there then, but I talked to a lot of you who were. How many of you were? Back there at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, were feminists, actively in the movement. Oh, wow, such a time, huh? Everything that's written about that, all women who were there, that was the golden age of feminism. Such nostalgia for those times. Women saying, I wonder what happened. You know, there was such enthusiasm, such fervor, such buoyancy, such hope. There was just never any other time like it. And you were calling yourselves the Women's Liberation Movement. And there was an understanding in this movement, on this continent at least, that has since kind of disappeared. Doesn't mean individual feminists don't have this understanding, but it doesn't seem to undergird the whole kind of group experience anymore. And that understanding that is everywhere when you look back there and talk to women who were there is that women are men's colonized lands. That we are colonized people. And just like the British went into Nigeria and took over that country because, of course, obviously those people were inferior. I mean, look how they look. They didn't look like God looked. God is white and delights him and looks like Englishmen. And clearly these people, how could they rule a country looking the way they did, non-God-like? And so, good for you, the Englishman said, here we are to save you from trying to do something you can't do, which is rule your own land, so we're going to do it for you. Boy, aren't you lucky. And so they took them over and they owned their country and they owned their bodies and they made laws in governing these people who had owned that land, whose forebears had been on that land for maybe millions of years, forever, no longer had any say about their own lives. If they broke laws on their own land, they were thrown in jail, imprisoned, killed. And they began to be colonized also in their heads, because they began to hear the trumpets of patriarchy again blaring at them, the trumpets of oppression saying, you're stupid, you're incompetent, we're better, you're meant to be slaves. They began to have the slave mentality. Their revolution was that they rose out of that, and then when they did, the colonists had to go home. But that women at that time, the beginning of as I say, the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, understood that women are men's colonized lands. That thousands of years ago, men began to own women's bodies and began to use women's bodies as their resources, began to mine us. Emotionally, we began to give men our support. We began to give men all we had. We gave them our children. We gave them our work. We gave them our labor. We didn't make them pay for it. We gave them our love. We gave them our attention. We gave them all our resources. And they didn't just colonize our lands, which meant that we were no longer involved in the decision-making about our own bodies, our own countries that housed our spirits, in which we had lived, in which we lived. They also colonized our minds, just the way they did the colonists do. It's a double whammy, you might say, because of course the mind and the body are not separate, as we have been preposterously led to believe. And that in fact, women are the economic base of patriarchy. It's our work, our labor, our resources that give men the wherewithal to run this world. It's based on slave labor. Women are we're the colonized. So central to that first part of the women's movement, that early part of the women's movement, central to that was the women's health movement. Because what was happening there was, for the first time in our lives, we were saying howdy to our own cervixes. I mean, we were looking eye to eye with our cervixes. We might have been the 17th pair of eyes to look at them. Another 16th may have been male. But finally, we were looking right at them and realizing something that sounds funny to say, but really is quite revolutionary. We were realizing that you didn't need male eyes to see female cervixes, or female vaginas, or female uteruses. And you didn't need to be trained by the male AMA as a butcher to be able to tell what needed to be done if there was something wrong, how to keep it healthy. We were beginning to understand that we could rule our own land, that we could do whatever it was that needed to be done for our countries. Just the way the Nigerians began to say, hey, you know, what made us think we couldn't do this? We'd done it forever before they came along. We were doing great. And they began to deprogram themselves of their colonized mind. They began to understand that they could do it. We were beginning to understand we could do it. We were doing menstrual extraction. Women were becoming midwives all over the place. We were beginning to talk about safe, effective, cheap, natural birth control measures we could do ourselves. We were beginning to talk about maybe we could even control conception with our mind and will, connected with the body. We're beginning to really move into self-rule. That means, of course, that we were breaking this contract, because slavery is always a contract. And I don't mean to say that it's a contract that we keep consciously, or that there isn't good reason why we have decided to keep that contract. This is not a blame the victim night. You know, it always is a contract. And when we began to do those things, when we began to say, in effect, without maybe even saying it, men don't own this. We can do what we wish with it. We can do it ourselves. We can do it better ourselves. When we began saying that and feeling that way, what we were doing was breaking the contract that said we will always look to the men to do it for us. We will always ask your permission. We will always acknowledge you as our owners, that you have a right to make laws about our bodies, our lands, that you have a right to colonize us. We will always do that. You can count on us. That's the contract. We were breaking that. That means that we were walking out of patriarchy. And, you know, when the slaves leave, you can't have any masters. It takes two to have slavery. It takes two to have patriarchy. If there aren't any slaves, there can't be any masters. And the slaves, we're moving out into a new world. We're just living in a new place. Well, if you don't think that the men who control this country didn't know that and didn't feel in their very viscera incredibly endangered, then you don't understand patriarchy. Because the men may not be smart out there, but they are incredibly crafty. When it comes to self-preservation, they are wily indeed. And they knew that if women take back our bodies, if we take back rule of our lands, if we begin to rule ourselves, patriarchy is over. And I don't know how consciously men oppress us. You know, we always say, the women who are still terribly distressed about, who can't face the unbearable thing that men hate us, who still want to think that men really wish the best for us, think, well, they don't mean to do this, they're just caught in it too. And maybe that's true, and I don't know what the truth of that is, and it's irrelevant to me. But I would be willing to bet my life I would be willing to bet anything. I practically know it. It's one of those things I just intuit madly. That when that began to happen, those men were fully conscious. And they met and had meetings, and they had many long into the night meetings about this. Because we were at the place where we could have ended it all. And so what they did was think of a plan. They thought of a strategy in this war against women. You can use strategy when we talk about men's ideas about what they need to do, because it's war. They thought of a strategy, and they sent an emissary out after us. And he came running after us as we were walking off the New World, and he was saying, hey girls, I don't know what to call it. Finally settled for girls. Hey girls, hey, just a minute, wait up. Wait, you don't need to do this. I mean, you don't need to learn to do abortions and learn to take care of your own bodies. You don't need to learn to bring your own, women bringing their own babies. Why should you learn to do all that? We already know how. And if you spend all your time and energy learning to do that and doing that, you won't have time left for your other issues. And, we love you a lot, they said, and we care about your movement. We want you to have what you need. So you won't have to spend all your time working on one little issue, reducing freedom to an issue, as tiny as you can get issue. So you'll have time to do all your other little bitty issues. You know what we'll do? Because of our love for you, because our caring about your being free, we'll let you have legalized abortion. Well, if you can let somebody, you own them. So they let us. So we were out there, and we hadn't spent, we hadn't had very many years of listening to our own voices. We were just beginning to be able to hear them across all those ages, all that ages of exile, those little tiny exiled voices starting to be able to be heard. They were so easily drowned out by our conditioning, our profound programming to believe that the men really mean the best for us, and that we can really get the masters to set us free, and that there's such a thing as being able to get somebody to free you. You can't be free unless you do it yourself. That's the definition of it. But we hadn't had enough time. They caught us in the nick of time before we had really got a hold of our own wise women's voices. And so there we stood kind of milling around, and we said, hey, I think this is a victory. Is this a victory? Yeah, I think this is a victory. Wow, right on. And so we came running back right into the trap. And for the next 15 years, what we've been doing is all over this country. Millions of women have spent millions of hours and millions of dollars in many, many states on their knees begging men to keep just a little semblance, just a little teeny piece of that allowance they promised us for abortions for poor women. Begging and pleading for just a little tiny, just to be a little kinder. Whereas if we had spent half that money, half that time, learning how to rule our own countries, learning how to get out of our colonized minds, learning self-government, we would now have a woman on every block who could do everything, teach us everything we need to know about our bodies. We would now be in full control of our bodies. We would be at the place in history where it wouldn't matter, in the history of this country, where it wouldn't matter. Those men could be spewing laws about our bodies out of every legal orifice. They could be threatening us on all sides with this, that, and the other thing, and telling us that we couldn't have abortions, we couldn't have birth control, we couldn't do this. It simply would be irrelevant, because we would be already in possession of the land. But someday we're going to have to do that. Someday we're going to have to rule our own countries. Someday we're going to have to really, really understand that the slave masters cannot free the slaves even if they wished. That freedom comes from inside. It is a state of being. It's a way of feeling about oneself. And the feeling is that we don't have to go through anybody else to get what we need. That we don't have to be relational all the time. That we don't have to have anybody else's approval. That we don't have to beg anybody. That we can do it ourselves. Whatever it is that we need, we can get it ourselves. That's the non-slave mind. Well, these women said to me, asked me some questions that I couldn't answer then. I had to go home and think about them. And even when I wrote that book, I didn't have them as clear as I'm getting them. And I hope that the next book is clearer. It's already being written, because once you get started, oh, wow, it's addictive to write your stuff, you know. It feels so good, and writing is thinking, and thinking feels wonderful, and thinking and feeling. Anyway, they said to me, they asked me these questions. They said, okay, Sonia, explain to us two things. Explain the dynamics of why what we resist persists, and what then, if we don't do that, what would you advise us to do? Aye, there's the rub. Well, so I went home and I started thinking about both of these things, and looking in my life, looking in your lives, thinking about it hard. And I began to remember one of the most important nights of my life, where I was at some feminist meeting. This wasn't the meeting in the Mormon church. I mean, you can tell already. I said feminist meeting. Some group of feminists were meeting, and some feminist was giving the speech, and being the voice for us all, which is what I feel like I am doing here. I want you to know that if I should suddenly drop dead or have to go to the bathroom or something, or be overwhelmed with hot flashes and have to go and take my clothes off in some other room, that any one of you could come down and give this speech. I want you to know that I know that. As I say all these things, I know this already about us, and that I feel enormously privileged that it's an honor to be able to be the voice of us, and that I am thankful for this chance to do it. I got thinking about that night that I sat in this meeting where this woman said the thing that began to change everything. It was the thing that made me cry. You remember when you first heard the thing that just made you just burst into tears, the first feminist words that made you say, oh my gosh, I'm not stupid after all. I'm not crazy after all. There are others like me. There is a whole world like me out there. This is my tribe. You remember, this is when this happened to me. This woman said, she was giving a speech and said, the means are the ends. That's a basic feminist principle, that how we do it is what we get. And I thought, oh, thank goodness, that explains why I have always felt so stupid in patriarchy. I thought about how I had been in all those seminars. I went clear through graduate school, got the doctorate and all that stuff, and felt stupid every single second. I kept thinking, boy, if I just get one more degree, I won't feel stupid. Well, you know, it didn't work, did it? And I'd be sitting in those English seminars, and oh, the English departments are so stuffy. Do you know that? Oh, they take themselves so seriously. They are so smart, you know. And there they are in their tweed jackets with their leather elbows, pulling on their pipes, talking about very important and brilliant things. And as they talk and talk, they would come to a place, as some guy was expounding his incredibly brilliant theory, that I would suddenly not get it. And so at first I would say, hey, just a minute, will you explain to me again? I didn't see the connection there. And then all heads would turn. And they would look at each other like, oh, why did we ever even allow them to learn to read? Well, you know, you only have to do that once or twice till you don't do it anymore. So we'd get to that place where I didn't get it, and then, like everybody else in the room, I would say, yes, very interesting. Just faked it all the way through. I never got it, not once. When I got to that place, never got it. And I'd get to the place, finally I didn't even realize I was faking it anymore. But on some level, I knew I wasn't getting it, and I really felt stupid. Well, I think that's the case with all women, and what I think is, or what I know is, the reason we didn't get it is because it wasn't gettable. We couldn't get got. Because this is the patriarchal mind. Let me just give you the best example I can give. All day long we hear this. If you've been anywhere today, you have heard this kind of reasoning all around you. Every day I hear another example. I think, wow, there it is again. There it is again. Well, because patriarchy has a means to ends mind model, you know. If we want this, then we're going to think of ways to get it. Dum. Cause and effect mind. And what they say, for instance, the best example I know of for that is, the men say, we want peace. And so what we're going to do to get that is we're going to bomb and massacre and eviscerate and rape and pillage and lay waste. And then there is this little magic moment of alchemy where suddenly, voila, peace appears. And I would say, hey, now run that by me again. I didn't get what happened. I didn't get what happened between rape and peace. You know, there was something in there I missed. Well, the reason, of course, that I missed it was because there is just everything between rape and peace. I mean, they never come together at all, because what we know, and women have intuited always, and what we now know consciously, is that there's only one way to have peace, and that's to be peaceful right now, this minute. This is a time to be peaceful. Now, if you want peace, be peaceful. That's how you get it. We've known that. And that there isn't any getting to peace from war. All you can get is more war from war, because the means are the ends. There's no separation between means and ends. How we do it is what we get. If we do violence, if we do fighting, what we get is more fighting. Okay, I said to myself as I was thinking this all over, trying to write this book, so this feminist said that. So does that mean it's true? Have you ever heard feminists say things that you didn't think were true? Yeah, I have. Yeah, well, maybe this is one of them. Maybe you'd better figure out why, if true, why is that true? So I thought about, okay, because I wanted it to be true, because it felt so good. Explained why I wasn't stupid. You see, otherwise I'm stupid, so I have great stake in figuring out why that isn't true. And when you have a great stake, boy, all your powers get focused. And I remembered, as I was thinking about this, how atomic theory, which is changing the whole way we view everything, and which I think wasn't possible really until the women's movement began to loosen up the global mind, till the women's mind began to predominate, is teaching us that, has taught us that this is an atomic universe that we're in. And that we're atomic people, that everything is atoms, that we are just dancing atoms. And in this atomic universe, the way atoms function is that there is no linear time. Time does not go like a river, ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. Time simply is. And that all the time there ever was, ever will be, ever has been, is right now. That we're sitting in it. This is all there is infinite. There's plenty of it. And it is also a split second. It is all that at once. But that we are in time as a fish is in the ocean. We are just in it, and that it is all right now. It is all at once. That there isn't time over there going to come sometime. The future isn't down the road someplace, and the past isn't way back there someplace, which is one of the reasons that some therapists now are saying you can change your past. Well, the reason is that it isn't out there, friends. You've got it right here. And we all know that the past is also in the body, which is always in the present. So all time is now. That's what it means when they say all time is now. It really is now. This is all the time there is. The past and the present and the future are all here together, because this is all there is. And several things that means, if all time is right now, it means that the only time that we have any power is right now, because this is the only time that we're alive. This very moment as we sit here is the only time we're alive. This is it. And the wonderful thing about the body is that it anchors us to the present moment. And because the Spirit is all through the body, we can rely on the body to tell us the truth. Because it never projects itself out into the body doesn't project itself out into the future, back into the past. The body is right now fully in our power. I mean, we are in our power, in our body right now, and only right now. And the body is so good about keeping us there. Anyway, so if we want whatever we want, we have to begin right now to have it, because this is all the time there is. That's one of the messages of that. But the other message is this, that if the present and the past and the future are all together right here, if the future is right here with the present, then it means that we can predict the future. I mean, the future isn't down there someplace, and there's no cause and effect, linear time. Then it means that we can predict the future by how we are being in the present, by what we're doing in the present, that if this is all the time, then what we are doing right now is the future, that the future is in the belly of the present, that it is being born, is coming through our loins in the present moment, because this is all there is. And if that's true, and I think it is, what that means is that what we are doing right now is what we'll be doing in the future. That's why the means are the ends. That's why how we do it, what we are doing is what we get, is because the future isn't separate from the present. That means that if we want peace down the road someplace, there isn't any down the road someplace. It is just now. That's why if we want peace, we have to be peaceful now. It's because there isn't any future. There is all time at once. That means, so when women say, okay, what shall we do? What I say is, do right now what you wanted to be doing in the new world. Right now. If we want a new world, and I don't think there's anything else worth even thinking about. I mean, I'm through thinking about the old one. It is so boring. If we want a world in which women are not afraid, and patriarchy can't sustain women's not being afraid, it is based on our fear. Our fear is absolutely essential to it. We must be afraid in order for men to rule us. And if we want a world in which men can't rule us, we want a world in which women are not afraid, then we have to be unafraid right now. We can't wait until something happens out there to make us unafraid, because you can't get to fearlessness from being afraid, being afraid, being afraid, being afraid, being afraid, and then one day, magically, be unafraid. There's only one way not to have fear, and that's not to have fear right now. If we want a world in which women don't sacrifice our present happiness for somebody else's happiness down the line somewhere, and you know there's a lot of that in the women's movement. When I first came into the movement, I remember women standing where I'm standing and saying things like, you know, we're doing rallies for the ERA and saying, boy, I know you're all tired out there. I know you've just been doing such wonderful work and you're all getting burned out. And it's just exhausting. And we know, I know, and I know you know that we're not going to see the results of this in our lifetime. But I'm willing to go on anyway. I'm willing to do this for my children, and I know you are. I'm not going to give up. You know I'm not going to see it in my lifetime. I'm going to do it for the generations following me, and I know you are too, right? And everybody's right, and I'm back there saying, yuck. I thought we were going to do it right now, you know. And then I'm saying to my... And then I say to myself, oh, now, Sonia, don't be so immature. You don't have to have instant gratification. That's a sign of immaturity. All that stuff, you know, I would say to myself. But I should have listened, because that was the right response, yuck. Because if we want a world in which women aren't sacrificing right now for somebody else down the line, then we've got to stop sacrificing right now. Because if we're sacrificing right now, we are making a future in which women sacrifice. There isn't any way to get to not being a sacrificial lamb from sacrificing. There is no magic moment. All that comes from sacrificing is sacrifice. How we do it is what we get. The means are the ends. It's a basic women's understanding that we have to start applying to our own lives and our own what we're about. If we don't want a world in which women are on our knees begging men to be just a little kinder, please, guys, please. If we don't want a world in which women are on our knees being slaves, then we've got to get up off our knees right now. We can never do that again. Every time we do that, we make a world in which women do that. We make a world in which women grovel, in which women beg, in which women are slaves, in which women think that somebody else is going to free us. Somebody else has got the power, right? We don't have any power. We got to get those that got the power to do it. Wrong. Who said they had power? They did. Doesn't that make you a bit suspicious? I mean, I got thinking about that. I hear women talk about the men in power. We got to get in there and get power. And I'm thinking, oh, there's something wrong with that. And I glommed onto the fact that men own the language, that they can call what they have anything. They could call it Shirley if they wanted. They called it power. And so we look out there and we see what they're doing, that incredible, vicious massacre of all life on the planet that they call power. We look out and say, well, if that's power, boy, I don't have any of that. I don't do that. So therefore, I'm powerless. Whew, I said to myself, was that clever of those guys? I mean, as I say, they're crafty. And I thought to myself, all right, what is power? Power is obviously not controlled by massive and profound violence and humiliation and terrorism. That's not power. Power is the generative, creative, positive stuff of life. Power creates. Power is about making more, about abundance. Power is a power to create, not to destroy. What's the power to destroy? It's weakness. That's what it is. Weakness is what destroys. Characterological weakness is destructive. And I look and I see then that what we've got are not men in power, but men in weakness out there. So I never reprogram myself by saying the men in power anymore. I always say, I reprogram myself by saying the men in weakness last week had Stupid Tuesday or something, I understand. And I don't know that from having read the Olds papers. I was being interviewed, somebody told me they just had Stupid Tuesday, and I said, well, I don't read the Olds papers, and I don't listen to the Olds, so I don't know what's going on with the men in weakness anymore, because I say the women in power are healing ourselves and one another. We're healing the whole planet, the women in power. Because women have that. And it's not power over, it's power to create, power to transform, power to make life and happiness and joy. That's what power is, and that's what we've always had, and that's why, as Mary Daly would say, the men turned it up.